that causes the barbell to drift anteriorly, so in front of the body. So in relation to pain, sometimes if someone's got a lower back that's being provoked through flexion or through bending, this will put a little bit more load through the extensors through the back and sometimes provoke their pain. So one simple thing that you can do to help improve their pain with a deadlift is by fixing that. So improving the bar path, so making sure that the bar is going straight up in a straight line or as close as possible, rather than drifting forward and then coming back. And the big reason we see this is people not having a great awareness of where the bar is in relation to their knees. So what they're actually doing is they're shooting their knees back, so their bum's coming up to get their knees out of the way of the bar. And then if you're looking, like if you can get a more superior view, and hopefully my videos are in order. Yep. So from here, you can see the gap between the barbell and the knees through there. It's a good inch or two. And if you can improve that, they will feel a lot stronger. Whether or not it improves their pain is going to be on a case-by-case basis. But if you can improve that, I guarantee you their performance with the deadlifter will improve. And if that means you can get them deadlifting heavier with the same amount of pain or same amount of symptoms, they're going to feel stronger and they're going to feel really good about that. So that's something to really keep in mind when you're doing it. And the way that I would do this is I would position something in front of them. So like a foam roller or a dumbbell, and don't let them hit the dumbbell or the foam roller. So I'll set this up so you guys can see. So that there. So even just having like a kettlebell or a foam roller right in front, and then making sure that the bar stays nice and close to their legs. So giving them an external cue. So giving them an external cue rather than an internal cue. So rather than saying, oh, try and keep the bar close to you, or don't let the bar drift in front. A more effective way is actually give them an external cue that they have to try and keep to. So they have to keep the barbell from touching the foam roller, the dumbbell, whatever you've got that's going to sit there in front of them, and place it in between their legs. So it's right in front of them so that they can see it. That can help with that particular fault. Again, if it changes their pain, that's going to be a case-by-case basis. So if you look at any of the best deadlifters in the world, Eddie Hall, any of the Olympic weightlifters, if you look at the bar path from side on, it's almost going to be a straight line because they've got their setup position to make sure that their knee isn't in the way. So this is going to be dependent on their morphology, which we'll go over in a sec. But the bar path is optimized by their morphology, but also their technique. And then their bar is staying super close to their base of support. So you want to make sure that the bar is staying in line with your midfoot and pretty much tracking in line with that. That way it's not drifting anteriorly or posteriorly, and you're not wasting energy going forward and backwards. So the way I like to think of this is just making you more efficient. So just as like you'd want to be a more efficient runner, you want to be a more efficient lifter, and there's quite a lot of technique that comes to these sorts of things. A lot of us just think, oh, if you can lift the weight, then lift it. But I think if you're going to do anything, try and do it right, and try and do it the same way the best people in the world do it. So that's
Mitch.
That's the first thing. Yes.
Doing a good job, mate. Thank you. I just want to say, if you demo something in the clinic, can you just exit the screen share and you'll go bigger again, and then we'll be able to see you a bit better.
Okay, cool.
Sweet. And if anyone's got questions, pop them in the chat. Thanks, mate.
Wait, how do I stop share? Do I just press the stop share button?
That should do it. We'll let you know. Yep.
All right, sick. So that is one of the first things. Now, I would say with the bar drifting forward, there's a couple of things that you can look at. Is it purely a awareness thing? is a purely just a technique fault, which will clear up pretty quickly just by those cues of putting something in front of them, possibly saying don't hit the target, or feel the bar up against your legs. I tell quite a lot of my clients that if you walk out of the clinic with like, you know, bruises on your shins or bruises on your thighs because you've kept the bar so close, then that's actually a good thing. Even though they might not agree, it means that you're getting the most efficient technique for the deadlift, so you're lifting the best possible way for you. The second thing to do would be the setup position. So if we go to here, now the difference, the setup position here is there's a much more horizontal torso, and the knees aren't traveled as far forward as possible. So it's looking a little bit more like a Romanian deadlift. And this particular deadlift positioning is really going to be dependent on a couple of things. Your hamstring and adductor length. So to have this particular position, you're generally going to need more range of motion through your adductors and your hamstrings. Otherwise, they're not going to get there without really getting a lot of tilt through the pelvis through that particular position. If that's a bad thing or a good thing, some of the research sort of said there's no problem with flexion with load. I like to, again, look at the top lifters and see how they do it. And generally their position stays the same in their lumbar spine from the initiation of the movement to the end range of the movement. So their setup position is, you could say neutral. You can't really tell, but the position from visually doesn't seem to change too much throughout the movement, except for maybe the last end ranges. So what you'll see here is that by having my knees not drifting as far forward, it's a lot easier for that bar to go straight up and down rather than drifting forward, because I'm not worrying about getting my knees out of the way. Now, you can change this setup position for someone and see if it works for them. But again, if they're quite stiff and tight, especially if they've got limited range through active straight leg raise, passive straight leg raise, maybe like a tactical frog or a adductor test to see how much range they've got. If they're quite tight through there, they might find this position quite hard. So the options would be to revert back to that more knee bent position, or to have the bar higher off the ground. So rather than sticking to a barbell from the floor, go up a little bit higher, do like a rack pull, and that'll mean that you can get them in that more horizontal torso position without having to go all the way down to the floor. I find this particular setup position, you'll feel a lot more load through the hamstrings because it is closer to an RDL. And you'll find this particular position has a higher knee joint moment. So there's some interesting research that shows the different types of deadlifts. So we'll go through them. These are both considered a conventional style deadlift, but this is probably closer to a Romanian because of the knee and hip position. That would have a higher hamstring contraction than the other two, but both of them have got quite a high hamstring contraction. The sumo deadlift, so this is where the knees are outside the arms, has a similar hamstring and adductor muscle contraction, which was quite interesting. I always thought your adductors would be working harder in this position, especially if you're going quite wide like I am. I feel it more in the adductors because they are being stretched. In EMG studies, they've found that the adductor contraction is the same or no significantly different to a conventional deadlift or a Romanian, which was quite interesting. Now, there's one particular page that I would recommend following, which has good summaries of some of the research behind this, which is strengthandconditioningresearch.com. And they've just listed like all the studies that they can find in relation to that. Let's see if there's anything. Can't do that position. So, mate. So those are the different types of deadlifts. So you've got the sumo deadlift, which is a much wider feet. The conventional deadlifts, which is knees inside of hands, and you can have a fairly horizontal torso and you can have a very upright torso, and anything in between, dependent on the person's morphology, range of motion, and even pathology. I would recommend different types. Because this has a higher knee joint moment, I would recommend this for someone whose knees are feeling pretty good and their back's probably a little bit sore. I would play around with this particular position first, because a more vertical torso is going to give you a lower net joint moment in the lumbar spine. Now, whether or not that changes people's pain, the research is, I'm not aware of it, but the line of thinking that I'd be thinking is less force or net joint moment would be lower chance of provocative pain or nociception. That's what I've generally found, is people who have lower back pain inflection. If you get them deadlifting with a more vertical torso, they'll feel a little bit better. And it's a fairly common compensation. Someone who has a really sore back, they'll generally not want to bend forward. They'll bend a little bit more upright and they'll bend through their knees a bit more. Now, conversely, if you've got someone with knee pain, you probably want to go something through there because it's got lower knee joint moment and they are using their hips a little bit more. So,
Mitch.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just waiting for the pauses. Just practically for a patient, and selfishly for me,
yes,
bad knees,
yep,
but really tight hamstrings, so I can't get into that horizontal position.
Yep.
And then my knees jut forward, so when I deadlift, I take a C path with the bar, kind of goes forward, like you said.
Yep.
Solution to very practical. Lots of people with tight hamstrings can't get that position, so their bar path goes forward. What do you offer for that?
So if we look at this next one, which is one that I haven't gone into yet, because we don't have that particular barbell, there's a barbell called a hexagonal bar or a trap bar. The reason they're very, very good is they allow you to lift more load. They allow you to get in a more mechanically advantageous position because you can have your hands by your side rather than in front of you, which will basically fix that anterior bar path issue, because you're not worried about hitting your knees because the handles are actually outside and you're standing inside the barbell. So the one that I've got up at the moment, I'm just holding 2 plates, but that's how you'd hold a hexagonal bar. And what I would recommend is if you're quite tight and you can't get into that really horizontal position for a deadlift because your hammies are restricting you and you can't get into that position, start off in this particular position with either a trap bar or just 2 kettlebells or 2 dumbbells, go heavy, and gradually start to change your torso angle as your hamstring length improves if you're focusing on the eccentric portion of it, because we know that eccentrically loading the hamstrings, you'll get that improvement in length and range as well as strength. So what I would recommend for someone like yourself is start off in this position, work up to like heavy sets of 6 or 8 with a tempo of, 1 second up, so nice and strong and powerful up, and then a 2 to 3 second tempo down, and really try and push your hips back and work on that that horizontal torso, and start getting a more forward leaning chest position until your hamstrings start to like really, really tighten at that end range. And then that's your end range position. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, bro, that's perfect. Thank you. The trap bar is helpful, and also starting off a box is helpful.
Yeah, so that would be the other option, would be like a mid-thigh rack pull.
Yeah.
I guess the practical logistical issues with that is you've got to have a setup where you've got a squat rack where you can adjust it and have it set up nice and high, or have something like takes a bit of a setup, whereas this, you just put 2 weights in your hand and you change your torso position. The goal would be to get to the point where you can do an RDL with your torso almost at 90 degrees. Because then that would get huge range of motion changes through your hamstring and take it through full length. And the study that I saw quoted similar hamstring contraction EMG. So I think it was maximal voluntary isometric contraction percentages as a Nordic, a glute ham raise, and a hamstring curl. So RDLs are great for that particular reason.
Thanks, mate. Some quality info there. Just some housekeeping, and I'm mindful of time. How much more do you have? Should we break this up into 2 parts? And I'm looking at roughly starting your treatment map at 1 or 10 past 1.
I can finish the deadlift in another 5 minutes, and then we can move on.
Awesome.
If you like, and then we can move on to the squat.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
That's all right. So the main things that I would really recommend for a lot of people is if you've got someone who's, and this is a case-by-case basis, if you've got someone who's really flexion intolerant, so their back hurts to bend forward, I would really try and push a more vertical torso. So a sumo deadlift or this trap bar deadlift with a vertical torso, because you can keep their comfort basically in their pain-free range or minimal painful range. And you can progress them to having a more forward leaning. And if their back flexes a little bit throughout that range, that's okay as long as the pain's tolerable. If you've got someone who's really extension irritated, lower the torso position probably won't make much of a difference. It'll be more of a load, like through that erector spinae, which interestingly enough, I found through the study, which was, it found a higher recruitment of lumbar erector spinae in the barbell back squat than the deadlift, which a common thing is that we go, oh, lower backs, you need deadlifts, but there's actually a higher rate, a higher reading of muscle contraction through your lumbar erector spinae. So if we're working on those big muscles through your lower back, you actually get more of that with a deadlift, with a barbell back squat than a deadlift, which I thought was interesting. I didn't really know that until I saw that on that page. Hello, Bridget. I just saw she was
Mitch, question.
Yes.
If someone has back pain, knowing that information, then would you be more likely to start them on the barbell back squat or the deadlift?
I guess it would come to their goals. If they're someone who don't go to the gym and lift heavy weights, then I would probably be more mindful that the ability to do a barbell back squat at home or outside of the clinic is probably limited. If they are someone who are going to the gym, I would definitely work them through the deadlift portion first and then start getting them to do back squats. The way that I would alter the back squat would be I would start off with a high bar back squat with their heels raised and focusing on a really vertical torso position and not really caring too much about range or how deep they can go, whether they can stay stable and their bar path looks good. But I would focus on the progression of deadlift, find the deadlift that feels comfortable for them, get them feeling strong through that, and then take them through the different variations in the deadlift so we can find the one that would normally be the hardest for them. So in your case, it would be the Romanian deadlift, and then start working on progressing from that to a back squat or a good morning variation to start loading up that erector spinae a little bit more and see how they go with that. Because I know with my personal experience is that my lower back got so much more jacked up with back squats than it did with deadlifts. I could deadlift with no real problems, but my back always got jacked after doing lots of back squats. So that was something that stood out for me.
In that acute phase, I think it's important for the others on the group just to go through or just to touch on that it doesn't always have to be loaded. Like if you're pushing someone into that hinge pattern and just training that pattern in the real acute phase of, low back pain, then that's going to have tremendous value as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's no reason you can't do this suitcase deadlift, with bottles of water or their shoes or anything, just getting them to move and then slowly, gradually building them through that. And then, I guess the hardest type of deadlift, I didn't film it, would be a Jefferson curl. That one's a bit more controversial and the school's sort of out on that one, but that's when you're taking your back through full flexion and then going into full extension. My thoughts are if you can get strong in every position, then you're more likely to break. But there'd be some people who don't tolerate that particular exercise, but you just gradually build them up.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
How do you put their heels up when they're practicing at home? Like what do you put under there?
Oh, for the squat?
Yeah.
Anything that they're willing to put underneath their feet. like I said, old books. Like if there's books that you don't read, I know Stacky has used a couple of my textbooks that I didn't really appreciate, but he's used some of my textbooks in the clinic before. But anything, really, anything that's, yeah. So anything underneath their heel. I really like the idea of doing it. If you've got any weights, weight plates are probably the best one, just because they're a really solid material and they're less likely to move around underneath your heels. The other option with that is if they're inclined to and they're a gym goer, you can always look into weightlifting shoes because they do the same thing.
Thanks, mate.
Cool. So yeah, the main messages is looking at deadlifts for knee pathology as well is looking at that knee angle. If you keep that knee angle nice and open, you're less likely to really annoy their knees, and it's a good exercise. If you're really looking to load up their lumbar spine, don't just stop at the deadlift. Look at doing some back squat variations, as well as front squat. Front squat elicits a large amount of erector spinae through the lumbar spine through there. And high bar, low bar, front squat variations are really good, and we'll go through them in a sec. Now, the barbell back squat. Now, the first couple of reps of this video is a common fault I see in people who are either just training on their own at the gym, or they've just started training and they haven't been cued on how to use their hips in a squat. So if we watch the first 4 seconds of that, if we go sort of there. So as you can see, what we see at the beginning of this movement is the initiation of the movement kind of comes from the knees. And if we look at this particular position, it might be a bit hard, how far the knee is in front of the toe. This is going to put a fair bit of load through the knee joint. So if you've got a client who does CrossFit, F45, boot camp, functional fitness, whatever it is, and they go, oh, we've been squatting a bit, my knee's really sore. If you see this type of loading where they just initiate through the knee at the beginning and they're getting to sort of this position at mid-range or at their depth, and you can change that a little bit just with cueing, more often than not, their knee's going to feel really good on the spot, and it's going to make you look like you fucking know your shit, which is pretty cool. I'll just jump on and see if there's any questions. Cool. So the thing that we'll generally do with this is trying to get them, and you can even see when I was doing this, that's as far as I could physically get without bending through my hips. So if I don't know how to use my hip hinge and bend through my hips and use my hip range, that's as deep as I'm going to get because I've got relatively long shins, right? So that puts quite a lot of stress on the patellofemoral joint in that particular range. It's usually when the peak ranges are at, is that quarter squat range. I could feel it in my knees. That's probably the most, like, I personally could feel it. Whereas as soon as I went and started bending through my hips more, so really pushing that bum back at the beginning of the movement and then going down, you can see that when I get to this bottom position, that knee is not as far in front of the toes, which isn't a bad thing. It just means that there's going to be less load through that knee joint. So if you've got a grumpy knee, that's going to feel better already, just because you're not going down as deep. You're not going into as much knee flexion. And I'm considerably lower in this particular position, and that bar is almost over my midfoot, right? So that bar path is still looking nice and straight. It's not the perfect squat, but it's better than if I'm going through there. If I do that first one, sort of in through there. Now, when I get to that bottom position, that bar is in a relatively similar position, but that knee's a lot further in front. So if you've got someone doing lots of squats and they squat like that, then you're more than likely, if you can just start cueing them to really overemphasize this hip hinge, really push your hips back in that squat and going down. One, you might be able to access more depth, which means you've potentially got them squatting deeper, which a lot of people are like, oh, I can never squat deep. Two, potentially making the knee feel a little bit better, which is really, really cool. And if you can do that, like there's been times where you're able to do that in consult. Their knee feels better and they can get deeper, which is pretty sick. And then they go, okay, like this person knows how to treat me. So that there is what your bar path will probably look like with a high bar back squat. Really, really upright torso in the starting position, and then hips go back, and then you're going down. The people I would recommend watching to get good at analyzing back squats and squatting technique is Olympic weightlifters. Go on Hook Grip and All Things Gym Instagram page and just watch every video they post and just watch them squat. And all of them access all of their hip range. Their bar parts look really, really good. They go all the way to depth and they look really strong. And on cadaver studies, Olympic weightlifters have the thickest and strongest ACL ligaments. So it's actually quite protective of the knee ligaments itself. So over time, the ligaments actually get thicker and stronger, which is really cool. So great way of helping your clients. Yeah. Oh, and Squat University. Yeah, that's also a really good one. Aaron Horshig. He's got some theories behind foot position and knee going out that I'm a bit here and there about, but everything, he puts out a lot of really good material, which is cool. Now, this particular squat here is really good for clients who are going to the gym. So I use this the most with CrossFitters or those functional fitness gyms where they're doing lots of squats and they're like, man, we've started this squat cycle and my knee's getting sore, but I want to keep squatting, or I'm at the end of the cycle and I don't want to lose my squat gains. Help me. Now, what you do is you place a bench or a box behind them, and the thing that I would usually cue for a lot of these clients would be have the box around about knee height, possibly a little bit higher. And if they're using the box, have the triangle of the box sticking in between your legs. So if this is the triangle, the corner of the box, your leg goes here and here. That way, when you sit your bum back, it's not getting in the way of your legs traveling and you've still got something to sit down on, rather than having the box sitting like that and then you've got to try and figure out where to put your feet. So it means you can get really, really far back on the box. So I've just done that same thing here on the bench. When we go into this position here, you really emphasize that hip hinge. And this is a really good way to teach them that hip hinging pattern, is either with a empty barbell or a dowel or a really light load and comfortable load for them. You cue them to push their hips back as if they're sitting down on their seat and they don't know where the seat is. So they're just got to keep pushing the hips back, hips back, hips back, hips back. And then as soon as they've got no more room through their hips, that's when they bend through their knees. And usually through that, they will get to this position at the bottom, and that knee angle there, as you can see, is considerably different to the back squat that I was doing without the box. And this will usually make their knees feel a lot better and they can continue to squat with a lot less symptoms. So keeping the person doing the thing that they want to do, keeping them squatting, you're teaching them how to hip hinge and really working that posterior chain. When you get them to push their hips back, you are getting them into that little bit more forward lean position through there, which is going to recruit a little bit more hamstrings and lower back. Now, back squat isn't a great hamstring exercise in itself anyway, so you might still need to do some separate posterior chain work if you think that's something that's needed, but this is going to get them to use that a little bit more. So that's the main thing that I would do for knee pain with squatting. The caveat to that is if you've got someone with a lower back that's really jacked and really, really sore, this rocking back and sitting down and relaxing position through here could potentially provoke their lower back pain. So if you still want to do this exercise, you might cut this rocking back portion down, and as soon as their thighs touch, you'd get them to stand up and go from there. So rather than rocking back and sitting there, especially if their back seems to get annoyed with that little bit of compression, you would just do that, reach back and then stand up and drive through there.
Question.
And then, yes.
So if they have back pain when they're squatting, do you ever cue them for the knees to go forward? So you get less into that hip hinge?
Yeah. So that would be another way of doing it is, as I mentioned earlier, you get the heels up, which means that you could access more depth and more range without needing them to push their hips further back. So if you get your heels up, it reduces the requirement of ankle dorsiflexion. So more commonly than not, you might get someone who's got stiff ankles and can't get to depth in a squat. If they've got a little bit of lower back pain and they want to keep squatting through that back pain, what you can do is get the heels up, like really, really overemphasize it. You tell them, you go, this is going to jack up your quads. Your quads are going to be working pretty hard during this, and we still have to keep an eye on it to make sure we don't overload your knee and your patella and your quad tendon. But because they can keep a more vertical torso, that will generally feel a lot better. And then as an adjunct, you could do a good morning with a lot lower weight. So as if, imagine the bench isn't there, you get them to bend forward through their hips, kind of like that. But rather than sitting down, you'd actually get their torso to come down further and do a good morning. And you get them to do that with really light weight. The recommendation that I saw on an Olympic weightlifting group was whatever your 1 RM back squat is, you should be able to good morning about 40% of that, for 8 to 10 reps pretty comfortably. So if you've got a standard gym going male, maybe 140 back squat, 130 back squat, you should be able to do that with 40%. So you're looking at 50 kilos for reps doing a barbell good morning. So that would probably be my normal treatment for if I've got a gym goer who's got a really jacked up back and it hurts with squatting, is elevate their heels, vertical torso, give them some good mornings with some really light weight that doesn't aggravate their back too much, and work their way up to where they can do a really heavy, strong good morning and they can squat really heavy. And then you start getting them back into squatting normally with a more hip hinge and vertical torso. That's one treatment path you can go down. Does that answer your question? Sick. The final one I would probably go on is the low bar deadlift. So it's kind of hard to see from this angle, but this is a low bar deadlift. Oh, sorry, squat. This is a high bar back squat, low bar back squat. So it's hard to tell from this angle, but I'll show you the difference. This bar is actually sitting lower on my shoulder blades, which is a lot more uncomfortable for your upper body than what a traditional high bar back squat is. So if you've got someone with really stiff shoulder external rotation, they're probably not going to tolerate a low bar back squat. But if they've got good shoulder range, a low bar back squat is a really good variation for someone who's got really bad, like really sore knees, or possibly needs to get, wants to maximize their lifting potential. So if you get someone who goes, man, my back squat's just plateaued, I want to squat heavier, I'm a power lifter, whatever. If they're still high bar back squatting, if you can get them to low bar back squat efficiently, you could potentially improve their back squat by 20, 30 kilos, just getting them really good at it. Because the biomechanics studies behind this shows that this is a stronger leverage position, which puts you at a mechanical advantage, which allows you to lift more weight. So if you watch, again, the power lifters, they will normally low bar back squat, especially the elite ones. You can go to any amateur meet and people are doing anything left, right, and center, but most of the elite power lifters will go quite low on the back with the low bar back squat. They might go slightly wide with their feet just to minimize the range of motion and to maximize the leverage position. Now, the setup position for the low bar is you have to have a more forward-leaning trunk position, because if you try and stand upright with that barbell sitting in the middle of your shoulder blades, the bar's going to want to fall down completely because it's not sitting on top of anything. And that's going to be super uncomfortable for a shoulder. So if you've got really jacked shoulders, and this is why I don't do it because I've got shitty shoulder range, is that will feel disgusting and it'll put a lot of stress and strain on your shoulders. So you have to have a more forward-leaning trunk position in the start and the finish. You won't be able to get more erect than that. So the hinging pattern is very, very hip dominant. You sort of just sit into that squat. Main reason is if you watch the bar path, it will generally stay quite straight. It leans forward a little bit at the front because I'm not that great at it because I don't do it. But you can get to that parallel position, which is if you're a power lifter, that's all they're looking for. but you can maintain that bar path position. You've got a shorter range of motion, and it's a stronger leverage position. So you can generally squat a bit heavier with that. The caveat to this is if you, it will require a little bit more hip range. So there's going to be some people who just can't tolerate that because of the demand it places through the hip, because they're just not using pretty much any of their range through their knee or their ankle. And the positions.
Got 2 questions there, Mitchy, whenever you're ready.
Oh, yeah, I'll go through those. What we got? How much do you pay attention to what tension someone creates through the foot hip during the squat, gripping the floor, using knees out to build some tension in the hip? Cool, good, great question. If you're assessing someone's squat and deadlift and they're wearing shoes, that's the first thing, is get them to take their shoes off. Even if they're doing it at the gym with shoes on, you want to see what's happening at their feet when they're deadlifting or they're squatting. The main thing that I'm looking for is even weight distribution. So you can't really see that in shoes, and you probably could argue that you can't even see it barefoot. But if you see that as they're squatting or they're deadlifting, that big toe or that pinky or those toes are starting to rock forward and lift up off the ground, you can tell that they're sitting too far back in their feet. They're driving maybe a PT has just yelled at them heels, 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 and all they think about is putting their weight through the heels, so they're not putting any weight through their feet. The reason that's important is that an efficient deadlift or an efficient squat is center of mass over your base of support, and you want to be sturdy and you want to be stable. Now, if you've ever tried to balance on something, you're not going to try and just balance on your heels because there's nothing in your heels to grip in. You want to grip in with your toes. You want to make sure your big toe, your pinky, and your heel are driving through the ground fairly evenly. So Squat University does a good talk about creating a really strong tripod. So that's kind of what I say. Really strong triangle, big toe, pinky, heel. You want it to be fairly even through your feet as you're pushing. If there's someone who goes to a smaller gym that aren't so strict with rules, I would squats to feel what's going on at your feet, or wear shoes that are really stiff and give you a lot of feedback. Those cushiony Asics, they're no good to train in at the gym. You need like really flat, minimal shoes, depending on the heel lift or whatever, but something that's quite stiff and gives you a lot of feedback. Other than that, I'm not too worried about it, as long as their weight distribution's fairly good and they feel nice and sturdy and even through the feet. And the amount of tension, what's his name? Anthony Lowe, the physio detective, did a really good talk about tension to task. I don't want people creating a shitload of tension and all this stability to pick up a water bottle. It's overprotective bracing. We're just feeding that protective bracing mechanism. But if they're going for a 1 RM deadlift, like I want them creating as much tension and stiffness as possible to match the task. So as the weight is getting more difficult for that person, or the task is getting harder for that person, they need to increase the amount of tension that they're creating from their hip, their lower back. You could look at their core bracing, knees driving out, toes driving out. All that's going to depend on the morphology of the person. If the person's got a really big Q angle and they're a female with really wide hips and that knee comes in, you just standing there yelling, get your knees out, is just fighting their anatomy. So you just go, cool, you weight even through your feet, create some tension through your hammies, brace through your core, lift that 1 RM deadlift, smash it. And if it's just a water bottle, then just pick it up however they can. So that's what I would be doing. Patrick, this might be controversial, but what if we want to build tolerance in knees if we're trying to avoid fear avoidant behavior? At what stage are we reloading knees, encouraging a free flow movement with a bigger knee moment? That's going to be on a individual basis. If you've got someone who's, 60 or 70 or 50 or 60, you might not be able to be as aggressive with the whole idea of getting them in the different particular positions and just loading the shit out of them in that particular position. You might have to be a little bit more gradual and just go, okay, there might be some movements that do put too much stress on the knees for this particular person. For instance, a patient I had this morning had a knee replacement in her late 40s. no longer has anything further than 110-degree knee flexion. So I can't load past 110 degrees knee flexion. So I'm really limited in what I can do with her in the sense of a squat or a deadlift. But an 18, 20-year-old who's just started squatting and deadlift, like, yeah, we'll do some heavy load and find the most efficient bar path for you to move the maximal amount of weight if that's what they want to achieve. And then maybe let's try these more provocative positions and get you to lift more weight through there. You can go down the fucking rabbit hole with this sort of thing. If you go and watch the Chinese weightlifters squatting in their training sessions, they will purposely go into valgus position, the internal hip rotation, to change the torque forces through their hip to generate more force through their squat. So there's a really funky video that I'll see if I can very quickly find. YouTube on young control. So there's an Olympic weightlifter in the North Korean, whatever they call themselves, democratic, YouTube, clean and jerk. And he's regarded as one of the best Olympic weightlifters of all time because he only weighs 56 kilos. So he's this tiny little dude and he can clean and jerk 177 or something. So he's one of the very few people to deadlift, clean and jerk triple body weight, which is insane. I want to see if I can forward. That's a shitty angle. So, shitty angle. I'm not going to waste too much time, but I would say find that video, Om Yun Chol, and get a front-on view and watch what happens to his knees and his hips under that maximal load. His knee goes into extreme internal rotate, like valgus, hip internal rotation. His hips shift to one side just to get the weight up. And some Chinese lifters will actually purposely train their athletes to do this in the training hall to get their tissue used to that amount of stress, but also to increase the mechanical advantage through that particular position because there's some theory behind that. I don't know that too in-depthly because I'm not a PhD in biomechanics. But the important thing, I guess this is something I didn't get to show. This particular here, this is the position of the barbell traditionally in a high bar back squat. And it's called a high bar because it's sitting higher up on my back. It's usually sitting on the upper traps. Most people will complain that it hurts their C7, C8, C1 bone. You can put a towel under it if you want, but just get them used to it and they'll be fine. And this is a low bar. So it's kind of hard to tell, but that particular position just there, just by not sitting on the upper traps, doesn't really have much of a shelf. So you've got to internally rotate your shoulder a little bit more to elevate your shoulder blades and your elbow to create that shelf for that barbell to sit on through there. And then you've got a forward leaning position so the barbell can sit in that position rather than sitting up nice and high on your upper back. Now, because I've got really shitty internal rotation through my shoulders, I don't squat like that because it really hurts. And I can't find a comfortable position for it. But I'm pretty sure I changed Hilly's back squat to a low bar and it's feeling a bit better. Yeah, it's a thumbs up from Hilly. She's been smashing her squats lately and she's moved to a low bar back squat, which is really, really cool. I guess that's most of the stuff we can go through. You can go down the rabbit hole. But the main ones that I would really say is follow the top powerlifters in the world if you want to see the best deadlifting and the best squatting for maximal weight. Eddie Hall, what's his name? Brian Shaw, the Thor, the Mountain from Game of Thrones, Thor Bjornsson. Watch all of them deadlift and squat. It's really, really efficient. And if you can get a side-on view, which is quite hard, they never film from side-on. Their bar path is just straight up and down. More often than not, their squat is a low bar, really, really pushing the hips back, minimal knee joint load. And the deadlift is bar path is like super straight up, and it'll be really dependent on the morphology. If you've got long arms for your body, which is the ape ratio, if you've got really long arms for your body, you're probably going to be a really good deadlifter. So best way to figure out your ape ratio is actually measure from fingertip to fingertip. And the ratio of that indeterminate to your height is, if you've got a really positive ape ratio, so your arms are a lot longer than your body, you'll probably find deadlifts a lot more efficient and stronger because you don't have as far down to bend to pick up for the barbell. My favorite way is you just go, I'll show you. You get arms. I'm going to turn this off. So you get your arms and you go touch the floor, reach up as high as you can, and stand it up and see where you end up. If you're up here, your arms are really long. If you're down here, your arms are really short. If your arms are short, you're going to find full range deadlifts challenging, but you're probably better at chin-ups and pull-ups because you've got shorter distance to go. If you've got really long arms, deadlifts are going to feel really good, but chin-ups and pull-ups will be harder because you've got further to pull.
Hey, Mitch.
Yes.
You ever give people sissy squats or variations of sissy squats to work on to try and help with their knee flexion or tolerate it?
Yes. So depending on what their particular condition is if there's someone, say, with like a patella tendonitis, patella tendon issue, patellofemoral pain issues, something around that anterior knee pain especially, if I've taken them through normal squats and all those sorts of things and some knee extension work and some quad work and they're tolerating it really, really well, I will try and get them into a sissy squat if I can, depending on what equipment they have available. Those of you who aren't sure what a sissy squat is, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. The machine at the gym will usually have like these little things around your ankles that hold you in there, and you can really, really squat down basically like that without your heels lifting off because it'll just hold your ankles in place so you don't fall forward. It really loads up the quads and the anterior structures of your knees quite a lot, and especially if they don't tolerate knee flexion really, really well, that'll really push them into that range, which again, if there's someone who I think has worked through that and is now up to the point where I'm going to really try and push their knee flexion to tolerate that provocative position, then I will do it, but I probably wouldn't do it before anything else. Personally, that's just what I've done. Do you do anything different?
No, it's just gradual loading. Depends on what they want to do.
Yeah. So you have some people where that won't make a big difference. But more often than not, if you can get them to that point, you're giving them more options. So then if they want to bend through the knees and do that with some load, then their knee's not going to hurt as much. So CC squats are really good, or Spanish squats. Spanish squats are really, really good. A Spanish squat is you have a band around the knees, like a big power band, and it's being pulled from a squat rack. So the band's pulling your knees this way, and it's just going to keep you upright, and it's going to act as a counterweight to keep your torso up. You could also do counterweight squats while holding the weight out in front. That usually allows you to load through the knee flexion a bit more and doesn't require too much equipment. But that's probably it for the squatting and the deadlifting. If there's any questions on how I would assess or change that sort of stuff, again, I'd really advise going on to watching all the powerlifters, watch some squat and deadlift, Olympic weightlifters, hook grip, and all things gym. Great to watch their squatting videos in training, as well as their lumbar spine position from the pulling position, because most of them will keep a fairly neutral spine. You won't see much flexion or extension throughout the moving through that. And I think the injury rate of lower backs is relatively low in Olympic weightlifters. I think their injuries are more shoulders and knees, I think.
Thanks, Mitchie. We might wrap it up. I'm just mindful of time here.
Yep.
Belly, could you create a new link, and we'll just exit this. The iMovers will come back into that new link, Belly. And thanks everyone for being on. For those of you who are on, if you've got any more questions, just leave them in the chat box here, or maybe on the Facebook comments under the iMoview post, and Mitchie will get back to you. And is there probably a part 2 to this, Mitchie? Or was that everything?
Well, it depends how in depth we want to go, but
Yep.
That's everything I had for today.
Yeah, sweet. Thanks, mate. All right. I will duck out, and I'll see the iMovers back on in a sec.
That was
Bye.
awesome, Mitchie.
Thanks for joining.